Companion. And we are live, Stephanie.
Fantastic. Thank you for letting me know that. And everyone, welcome to the event. My name is Stephanie Lopez. I am the program manager at LatinasRepresent. We're really grateful to have each and every single one of you here. And just for everyone to have the best experience, please make sure that you stay muted, that you turn off your camera. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chats, tell us your name, where you're from. We want to know, where everyone's from at this point. And then please make sure that you also plug your questions into the chat. We are going to be having a Q&A section at the end, and we want to get to as many of your questions as possible. So please make sure that you're plugging any of your questions into the chat. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. I know that people are still joining us. To every single one of you that's coming in, welcome. We have a really exciting program for all of you. So we're really excited to talk about how to advance Latina leadership in government and demystify the federal appointments process. This event is being brought to you by the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda, which is a coalition of about 40 national Latino advocacy organizations that our focus is to raise public awareness around the major policy issues affecting Latino communities and to increase the visibility of Latino communities in the country's affairs. It's also being brought to you by LatinasRepresent, which is an initiative of the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda, and our mission is to increase Latina civic engagement and political participation, as well as to inspire more Latinas to seek public service opportunities to help create a more reflective democracy. We have a lot to get through today, and we're really excited to be talking to these amazing Latinas. First, we're going to have a little bit of advice brought to you by Latina members of Congress. And then Melody Gonzalez, who is one of our federal appointees, is going to be talking about the federal appointments process. After that, we're going to jump into a conversation with the federal appointees or former federal appointees who are joining us, as well as the Congressional Hispanic Caucus representative. And at the end, we will leave some time for Q&As. And so I'm going to now pass it on to my colleague, Rosie Hidalgo, who is the co-chair of the Latina Task Force. She is also the Senior Director of Policy at Casa de Esperanza, and she will be talking about this video we're about to show.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much. We're happy at Casa de Esperanza, the National Latina Network for Healthy Families and Communities, to co-chair the Latina Task Force of the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda. And I want to first thank you, Stephanie, for all your great work coordinating this event today. I want to thank all our speakers who are taking time out of their busy schedules to join us, for all their leadership and advocacy and sharing their words of wisdom with us today, and each one of you for participating. And as Stephanie said, we want to start with some words of inspiration and encouragement by first sharing a brief video with some highlights. And these are highlights from a recent conversation we had with Senator Cortez Masto, the first Latina elected to the US Senate, and former Representative Ileana Ross-Lehtinen, the first Latina that had been elected to the House of Representatives, and Senator Cortez Masto from the Senate. And so it's really exciting. Our CEO, Patty Tototzinle, had a chance to bring the two of them together to talk about Latina-led leadership, Latina advocacy. And they told us it was the first time that two of them had had an opportunity to be together and have this important conversation. And they really lift up why we need to have more Latina voices at the table where decisions are being made, and how better policy comes about when all the voices of our diverse communities are represented. So I hope you enjoy this short video highlight. At the end is a link to the full 30-minute interview if you want to see it. And then we look forward to hearing from our speakers and engaging with you today at this event. Thank you. Makita, I don't think people hear the sound. If there's a way to increase the sound.
Stephanie, did you click those two boxes?
Yeah. Let me try again.
To start off our virtual celebration, I spoke with two outstanding Latina leaders, both of whom have experienced breaking glass ceilings. Representative Ileana Ross-Lehtinen was the first Latina ever elected to Congress. She represented Florida's 47th district for 30 years, from 1989 to 2019. And Senator Catherine Cortez Masto was the first woman elected to represent Nevada in the U.S. Senate and the first Latina ever elected to the U.S. Senate. Both Senator Cortez Masto and Representative Ross-Lehtinen offer important perspectives on Latina leadership. They will share some of their stories, what they've learned about supporting rising Latina leaders, and how it all connects back to the work mobilizing our comunidad to end gender-based violence.
Thank you. Listen, I am following on the heels of Ileana. She's got just an incredible reputation here in Congress, and I was so pleased to be able to get to know her and work with her, and we'll continue to work with her because I know she's not done. But let me say this, because I think it is important, and I think Ileana touched on it, particularly for women. We just do it, right? We know there's something that needs to be done. We're going to focus on it and we're going to make it happen. We're going to solve problems. We're going to work to get there. And then we realize, oh, wow, nobody's been here before. This is the first time. So even for me in the United States Senate as the first Latina, it's a similar kind of experience where you don't think about it. You just think about, I know why I'm going, and this is why we need to be there. Most importantly for me, it wasn't about making history. It was really making sure now that we had another voice at the table that's going to represent a community who's traditionally underrepresented. And we still see that across the country now. I think it is so important that as we work in government, the people who are elected, who are working in government, are just as diverse as the people we represent, because that informs our policy, right? It informs good policy, though, so that we are representing everyone, and that good policy is bringing everyone along, and we don't leave anyone behind. And I think that is so important, and that's why I continue this kind of, I don't want to say a fight, but I continue this advocacy that we need more representation. We are so underrepresented, and our voices are important, and we need to make sure that we're using our voices and we're at the table and we're involved in those decisions. Women have a tendency, particularly, to think that they have to check boxes before they can move in their career, right? I have to have the experience. I have to make sure I have the education. I have to do this and that. And quite often men will say, I don't know, how much does a job pay? Okay, I may be interested or not. So I think and so for women, and I tell them, just believe in yourself. If you've got the passion and you want to make a difference and you know this is where you need to be, then believe in yourself to get there. Have that confidence, because you can do it. Women are famous multitaskers, and we have the ability to solve problems. That's what we do. That's why the women in the Senate, we all get together on a regular basis and we have dinner and we talk about legislation, because we are problem solvers. We just want to get it done. And so that's why I always tell, particularly women in general, just have true faith in yourself and confidence, follow your passion. And people will see how sincere you are. And whatever it is, whether it is in the private sector, government, just do it, believe in it, and don't think that you don't have the ability or you need to check some sort of box to get there.
Yes, I so agree. And I would follow up with that with saying, and once you get to that position of power, help other women. Don't think, okay, now I've made it, that's fine. Hey, look at me. It's all about me. No, that's what the guys do. Don't want to be gender shaming that way, but sometimes that happens. Women, we have to be helping other women because we don't have as many networking opportunities as the males have, and so we need to help other women once we get to where we want to go, and help them realize their goals. And I'm thinking about this little pin, and that was my first pin when I got elected in 1989 in the 101st Congress, and how far women have come since that time. How many women senators we have of both parties, and the best is yet to come.
Thank you, Rosie, for introducing that video, and I hope that it was inspiring to all of you. Now I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel, including our moderator. These women are all incredible. They are going to provide some amazing insights, and I could go on and talk about each of them for a very long time. So I've tried to shorten down their bios so that we have enough time to hear from them. And I'm going to start off with Grisella Martinez, who is currently the Vice President of Government Relations at the National Association of Broadcasters, where she represents radio and television broadcasters before Congress and within the media and telecom industry. She is a trusted resource for members of Congress and their staff for both policy and political matters. And before joining the National Association of Broadcasters, she served as a political director on the Hill and also worked in the nonprofit space advocating for immigration reform. She also sits on a number of boards and advocates for diversity, inclusion, and is also a supporter of the performing arts. Our next panelist is Melody Gonzalez, who currently serves as the Senior Advisor of Latino Community Advocacy and Partnership Engagement at the National Education Association. She has many years of experience in union, nonprofit campaign, and the federal sector. She served as a senior executive level appointee in President Barack Obama's administration, and where she served as the Chief of Staff at the U.S. Department of Labor Mine Safety and Health Administration, and as the Deputy Chief of Staff at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. She also has extensive experience on Capitol Hill, as well as the campaign trail, and serves on a number of boards. And next we have Yvette Fernandez, who serves as the Vice President of Government Relations for Endeavor, which is the parent company of multiple entertainment companies. She has over 20 years of experience in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, And prior to joining the private and nonprofit sector, she worked for President George W. Bush at the White House as a political appointee, and she has also worked for U.S. senators. She has been recognized for her contributions to many communities by other entities. And finally, we have Alma Acosta, who is the executive director for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus that is currently 39 members strong, yay. She is a first-generation Mexican-American. She was born in Mexico, raised in Southern California, and has served as the CHC Executive Director for the 115th and 116th Congress. Before being the Executive Director, she worked as a senior policy member on Capitol Hill and got her start there through a fellowship with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, which is also an NHLA member organization. So welcome to all of you fantastic Latina leaders. And I want to jump in. Obviously, each of you are incredible, but we want to get started with having Melody present a couple of slides about the presidential appointments process, and then we'll jump into the conversation to learn more about each of you, your work, what inspires you, and why presidential appointments are so important for Latinas to get involved in.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Stephanie, and thanks to the full team at NHLA that's helped make this important conversation possible. I look back to about 16 years ago when I first came to Washington, D.C., and to see the progress around our community's growth and representation in a number of different areas of government that really serve our community has been really exciting, but I know that there's so much more that we need to do to grow our representation. And so for me, I'm thrilled that, coming from San Diego, I never imagined I would have an opportunity to work for a president or serve in Congress. And so I want to share with you all some of the tips that I found helpful from a few different perspectives. One, when I had a chance to work with NHLA in standing up the LatinasRepresent initiative, which is really fantastic to see running and thriving, as well as the Latino appointment program. I also had a chance to be a candidate myself for presidential appointments, and then did end up serving in two different roles in the Obama-Biden administration. Now I also serve as a state level appointee. So I also want to encourage you all to be thinking about how some of these tips might help you also be thinking about appointments with your local cities, counties, and states, because as a member of the Virginia Latino Advisory Board to Governor Ralph Northam, I can say that we are eager to open the doors of appointments to more people, and we need more representation, more applicants from our community. So I'll share with you a few of these tips, and we can go ahead and jump to the next slide. And these are some tips that I found helpful in terms of both supporting staff and also those that were applying for appointments. This photo, I share here is one of our Latinos 44 community. These are the faces of talented, brilliant minds from across the country that I had the opportunity to serve alongside with in the Obama-Biden administration. He was the 44th president, so that's why we call ourselves Latinos 44. And one of the memories that just really sticks with me is that of the president and the chief of staff and senior leaders sharing how you may never have as much of an opportunity to impact as many people in this nation as you do when you are a presidential appointee and when you have the honor of privilege of serving in some of these roles. And I think particularly in this critical moment of time, our voices, our understanding of our communities in a number of different policy areas is so critical. And so I share this to show that, many of the people that serve, as you'll hear from Yvette as well, people come from a number of different states, places, backgrounds, and so know that there is no one path that will get you a presidential, state, or local appointment, but your story is special. You have something to offer, and so always be rooted in that. We can go ahead and jump on to the next slide. One of the great resources I want to make sure you all know about is the Partnership for Public Service. So we can drop this link into the chat so you can check it out. They have a fantastic resource on their websites. They also have a podcast called Transition Lab that you might want to listen to. They're really experts in good government, working with administrations of both sides and federal career employees as well, to really track and make recommendations around how government can be strong. And so they've shared in their report that there are 4 presidential types. So it's always good to understand that there are 4,000 presidential appointments, more or less, that a president will have the opportunity to appoint. They fall into these 4 categories. So first, about 1,242, 1,250 are presidential appointments with Senate confirmation. So these are your cabinet secretaries. They're those individuals that are so senior, they go before the Senate, different committees to present themselves. They actually are voted on by the US Senate. There also then are a next tier of senior leaders, the 459 PAs, which are presidential appointments that do not require Senate confirmation. They too may be very senior roles or White House positions. Next, you'll see that there are about 761 non-career senior executive service positions. You might hear the acronym SES on occasion. So that refers to senior executive service level roles. There are a number of them all across the federal government. About 90% of them or so are career senior executive service roles. So the career staff are there regardless of a presidential transition. And then the others, about 761 of them in this particular case, were non-career. So that means they're presidentially appointed SES level roles. And the universe that I think a lot of people tend to fall in is this last category of Schedule C appointees. So there are about 1,538 of them. And I wrote there that they are at or below GS 15 level. And so what that means in the federal government, there is a pay scale. You can Google and take a look at opm.gov, for example, to take a look what the pay scale is. And the higher you are on the GS pay scale, the highest being GS 15, the more senior, the higher pay. Lower positions, for example, might be ranked at GS 7 or GS 9 level positions. And I share this as a starting point because you will use this when you take a look at the Plum Book. And the Plum Book is a resource. We can go ahead and jump to that next slide. That is a snapshot of who was on the payroll at one moment in time during the 4 years of a presidential term. So you are able to actually go online and take a look at the Plum Book for the past several years and see what offices existed, who held the positions, and start to get a sense of what sort of departments, skills, functions, leaders you might want to serve in if presidential appointments were your interest. And I'd also share that similarly, the same sort of research is something that you could do and should do at your state level with your local cities and counties and boards. Take a look at what opportunities exist, who's serving them. And in the case of the Plum Book, you can take a look at this table and see, the first column shows you location. There, while the majority of presidential appointments are in Washington, D.C., there are some that are regional. So people may be interested in working in particular parts of the country. You can skim and see where those opportunities exist. Then you can take a look at the title, who held the position. Again, this is just a snapshot of one day of who was on the payroll, not necessarily all who served during an entire term. But it's a helpful way as a candidate to start researching where you might want to serve. And then you can see the columns that explained what I just shared with you, the types of position. You see the secretary there is considered PAS, so he is presidentially or Senate confirmed there. And as you scroll down to the bottom of this screenshot, you can see some of the positions might be GS 15 rank, GS 14, GS 13, and so on. So that's a really helpful resource. I wanted to share those tips. And most importantly, what you want to be thinking about as a candidate is where you want to serve, what sort of functions interest you. And we can go ahead and jump on to the next slide. So that Plum Book is a helpful starting point, but you've got to also do your reflection on yourself. And as you're reflecting where you might want to serve, it's always important to keep this image in mind. Applying for a presidential appointment, and oftentimes applying for appointments at other levels of government as well, require lots of influencers, lots of stakeholders. And so in the case of presidential appointments, there is a presidential personnel office that exists within the White House. They work very closely with the staff of the different agencies that are trying to fill slots, and they basically coordinate between themselves to come up with a slate, a list of candidates to interview, and then to ultimately determine who that person might be that is the best fit for that particular job. And on the federal agency side, there are a number of different potential influencers or hiring managers. The White House Liaison is an important role to know exists within the agencies because they're really that person that's hand in hand working with the presidential personnel staff and the hiring manager to create that list. And so as a candidate, one of the things that's helpful to think about is making sure you find ways to have validators who can get your name into both sides of this triangle. So you don't want to apply just one time and imagine that your work is done. But wherever there are opportunities for you to share where you want to serve and have that known on both arms of this triangle, that can only be of service. And we can go ahead and jump to the next slide. And one of the things I think that's so helpful that I really wanted to share is, again, this is more than just technical work. Applying for these sort of jobs requires personal reflection. And so I share a few questions here that I hope will help you as you're researching and considering where you might want to serve. And again, these are questions that can apply for presidential appointments, but also state and local ones as well. So one is to really think about your story, right? How do you personally, professionally connect to the office or commission or board that you're interested in, its staff, its hiring officials? What are some top stories of your accomplishments and qualifications, especially those that you want others to retell, right? Like I mentioned, you'll need a lot of validators. So always think of your stories, how you can tell them crisply so others can retell them. You also want to be thinking about what makes you uniquely qualified. For example, if you work in the communications department, there may be many others who are speechwriters or work with media, but what makes you uniquely qualified? Right? Sometimes that might also be part of your personal story. So that might be something you want to make sure you bring into the space, into your applications and interviews. And we can go ahead and jump on to the next slide. And here's another last round of questions to help ground yourself as you're thinking through what opportunities you'd like. You know, one is really important. I think, what are your goals, values, and interests? Right? You want to make sure that those goals, values, and interests are in sync with the office or the board or position you're seeking. And the next question, I think, is also really valuable. What experiences would you bring into the administration? But also, what experiences might you want to leave with? And that might also help you start to narrow your focus as to which positions might be most valuable to contribute to. And then last but not least, are you ready for the PPO, vetting, and security clearance processes? So with these roles, you are subject to a lot of screening, a lot of vetting. So you need to make sure you start getting ready for that. And we can talk a little bit more, but just for example, some of the forms you have to fill out might ask you to take a look back at all of the different places, all of the countries you've traveled to in the past 7 to 10 years, for example, all the places you might have lived, so that all your past employers. So you may want to start to put all of that list together for yourself, so you have that handy for your review. Let's go ahead and jump on, and I'll share too on the security and vetting piece too. The Partnership for Public Service has, you know, some great PDFs and reports and resources you can skim through. But last but not least, I think these are just some different tips. And again, they came as I was trying to support candidates through the NHLA program, things that were helpful for me as a candidate, and then actually being an appointee, things that I thought were helpful that I gleaned from others. So one, I can't emphasize enough, really research the roles and the people that you want to work with, right? It's really hard if you say, I'll serve anywhere, because you need to guide people as to where you want to serve, what will make you happy, where can you thrive. In the case of the Obama-Biden administration, this may change, you know, in the future. But one of the tips they would give is to condense your resume to 1 page per decade of work experience. That may be a challenge, but that also will be helpful for your process of distilling where you really want to serve, what your stories are. Another key thing in working with the White House Presidential Personnel Office is that they'd emphasize the importance of managing your expectations. No one person's process is the same. No timeline is the same. So, you know, keep that in mind and try to stay optimistic as you're working through these processes. I emphasized that next point of telling your stories so others can retell it. Remember, you're going to need validators in a number of different places. You want them sharing the stories of your experience as you want them told. You also want to stay busy, again, knowing these processes could take a while. Always continue building your skills, build your relationships, you know, be strategic and volunteering for different campaigns or other boards and commissions. Prepare in case you need to campaign for your position. This is also something that you'll hear referenced in the Partnership for Public Service podcast. I emphasize prepare in case, right? You don't necessarily want to launch a full-on campaign to pursue appointments. Sometimes that can be too much. And also maybe cause people to question your judgment if that's your approach. But instead, it might be helpful to share as you're going through the process. Here's a list of some of the people, some of the leaders or organizations that I know would be willing to testify to my character and to my work. And just perhaps having that list handy, being able to share that could be helpful. So when or if you do need letters or calls, you have that handy. And last but not least, I like to emphasize that your voice is valuable. each and every one of you joining us here today has something beautiful you're probably already offering to the world and that you can offer as an appointee. And so remember that your personal and professional experiences are needed in appointments. And again, not just presidential appointments, but also state, local appointments and other realms of public service. So those are some top line tips that I've learned along the road that I thought would be helpful to share with you all as we lead today's conversation.
That's incredible. That is an enormous amount of information. But I think what's so valuable about that is that one of the hardest things for people to figure out in this process is where to start. Where do I even start, right? This idea of coming to Washington, being an appointee, I think for a lot of people probably feels very daunting. So thank you for kind of that, that overview. And I'm sure we're going to have some questions from folks. So I want to start with a question for all of you, because you all bring a lot of different experience to this process and looking at it from different angles. And so, we know that Latinas are underrepresented at all levels of government, including in the federal government and within the appointments. And I think that's probably true, as Melody just laid out for us, both in kind of like mid-career and then certainly higher up as you go, whether it's the SES, the confirmed positions, what have you, those numbers dwindle, right? So the numbers that were probably already low dwindle the higher you get. And so what do you think accounts for that? And what are some of those barriers you think that have kind of contributed to that? And I want to start with Melody, because I think you just were really kind of on point, and then we'll go to Yvette and then Alma.
Yeah, I mean, I would say one thing that I remember from standing up the LatinasRepresent initiative with Rosie and many others that are here from NHLA today is that when we would host events for appointments or the LatinasRepresent initiative, people would come, right? And for some reason, we know that there's this study that shows that women have to be asked 7 times before they actually run for office. So I'll say for all the ladies in the room, I invite you to run for office. I invite you to apply for appointments, but you also shouldn't have to be asked 7 times to apply to run, right? And so I think we have to share our stories, share our tips, and really invite and encourage and persuade others to apply for these opportunities, because like I said before, I think our experiences are so needed. And rather than overthinking, letting imposter syndrome creep in, letting that self-doubt creep in, we heard it from Congresswoman Liliana Ross-Lehtinen and Senator Catherine Cortez Masto. We just have to do it. We just have to apply and start getting in there. I think we've seen since the time I've been here as a grad student to Hill staffer and now in my role here at the NEA, I've seen a growth in the Latino representation in Congress, in government. It's slow, but I think we have to be very committed to it. And through events like this, I think we have a community that we're definitely growing.
Great. Yvette?
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about speaking to all of you. I did want to stress that, I'm from a small town in Alaska called Fairbanks. So a Latina from Fairbanks, my parents are originally from Mexico. So as you can imagine, I grew up far from Southwest. I grew up far from, Florida or the Northeast, where you have a large, group of Hispanics. And far from Washington, D.C. And so, I want to talk about kind of my experience as it relates to coming from a completely different environment and different group of people, far from the center of politics. I always had a passion for international affairs. I think just because of my background, we used to host exchange students. And so that kind of desire made me realize that I thought I wanted to be a foreign service officer. So I started off university in Alaska, the main campus, and then I transferred to George Washington University in DC and graduated from there, and then went to Georgetown to get my master's. And when I was in DC, I thought, I wanted to be a foreign service officer. And then I realized I was like, I'm already 12 to 15 hours away from my family. I don't want to be an additional 10 hours away from them. So I've always been interested in politics. I was in student council when I was younger. And so when I was in DC, I believe it or not, at the time, my mom owned a small beauty shop in Alaska. And at the time, the then senator's wife went to my mom's beauty shop. And so when I went to school in DC, she told me to apply for her husband's, internship program. And so I learned about internships then. I didn't know what an internship was. I had never heard about that before in my life. In Alaska, there aren't a lot of internships. And so I thankfully actually was able to work for him. He was one of Alaska's US senators. And then he became governor of Alaska, and then I worked for his daughter. And it was during that time frame that I actually, just was able to network. And I know this is going to sound really strange to say, but again, growing up in Fairbanks, Alaska, where there weren't, it's actually the second largest population Hispanics, but it was still small, 3 to 4% of the population in Alaska is Hispanic. I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me. So when I went to DC and I met all these different, Latinos and Latinas from all different backgrounds, I was like, wow, I didn't know about the diversity even within our own community. And it was there that I really became friends with people, people who were like-minded. I'm a Republican. I know that in today's world, that seems a little odd, just given the current landscape in today's elections. But it was really through my desire and my love for politics and wanting to make a difference and seeing my parents in Alaska. We were the cultural center in our hometown. I had the first quinceañera. Anyone who's Hispanic who came to Alaska, or Fairbanks, I should say, always stopped by my mom's house. And so it was that kind of community leadership that made me realize I love politics. So I went to DC, went to college there, got the internship, and then really realized that that was my passion. I didn't want to be a foreign service officer. So, and it was through my learning about the Hispanic community that I gained these amazing friendships, both in the Republican and the Democratic Party. And it was those genuine relationships that really kind of got me into kind of the presidential appointment pathway, if that makes sense. Yeah. So when President Bush was running for re-election, I knew that I wanted to volunteer for his campaign. And so I asked my friends who were working for the campaign. So I volunteered, and then I became friends. And then when he won, I applied for a position at the Department of Homeland Security. I worked for the Deputy Secretary. The number 2 at any department is always a Deputy Secretary. And I worked for him for 3.5 years. And then I worked at the White House the last 2 years. And so I can tell you truly that the catalyst for both of those positions was the genuine friendships that I had started because I was new to a community, new to DC, new to the national political scale, and really wanting to make friends in the Latino community. And so those people knew my work ethic, knew my background, and were willing to vouch for me. And they were able to help me kind of navigate, that pathway. And so I'll talk more about my process as the time goes on, but I do want to stress the importance of genuine friendships. I think right now is an interesting time. It's October, 2 weeks, we're going to have an election, and there most likely will be a transition. And there's going to be literally thousands of people that are going to be transitioning out and transitioning in. And to be able to fill in those thousands of appointments, you have to go through tens of thousands of resumes, right? So I think that you need to look at your current network and who are those relationships you built with, either your mentors, your friends, your family, your former employer, somebody that that you can reach out to and get those, references and for people to vouch for you.
Yeah. And so thank you so much. That is like just such a, thank you for sharing all of that with folks. And before we go over to Alma, you basically, I think, if in what you just shared with us, that speaks to what we were talking about in terms of access as a barrier and access at different levels. So I think, like, as folks, heard, right? What do you have access to? The access that Yvette had when she was in Alaska, not in a community with people that kind of knew about this process, not what have you, like. And I think that one of the things that I think that's obviously great about technology and about the internet and all these things is that there's a level of access that didn't exist before in terms of like, how do you even know these things exist, right? Like, how do you even know that an internship exists? How do you know the process exists? And I know Melody's been sharing some links as we've been talking, again, to go to this question. And I think that access, right? And whether it's the access that you build through your relationships, whether it's the access that you build through researching the process of what are these positions in the plum book? Do I know anybody in my network that is, knows somebody, even if it's not that person isn't an appointee, does that person that know someone who's an appointee, right? And so I think that's one of those places and those ways in that we break down some of those barriers, right? And I think there's a role for all of that to play into that. So like Alma, I don't know, you come from the Hill world, but also too came to DC as a CHCI fellow. And so also like talk to us a little bit about like access and barriers and kind of how you see representation needing to move forward in the appointments process.
Sure. So I was at a CHCI graduate fellow. It was right in 2012. We were coming out of recession. So I just thought I would come to the Hill, work for 9 months, go back to California. I didn't know anything about really Capitol Hill. One of my graduate professors showed me the program and just said, hey, this might interest you. You're a Latina, check it out, right? And so little did I know that I don't think I would be here, right? Like I had no knowledge about DC or politics or federal policy. So having that professor reach to me, tell me about this program, having this pay for me to come here and to give me a stipend and to have me work on the Hill and those connections, right? I met you, I met my boss, I met so many different Latinas and Latinos and leaders that once I was here, I was exposed to a whole new world and so many opportunities, right? And so I think what we see in the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, we look at diversity in various industries, right? And it appears that sometimes Latinos, there is a pipeline for Latinos, but we just don't know how to access these points, right? Or we're overlooked. Opportunities go to other people, friends with friends, right? So I think really making sure that we are supporting each other, that Latinas are looking out for each other, is really important to ensure that people can be promoted. Oftentimes we see people kind of give up. You have a dream in being an OT or working on the Hill, but you just try and it just doesn't become a reality. Then you're like, I have to go look at something else because I have to pay bills, right? So I think those are some challenges also that Latinas encounter.
Yeah, and I want to ask you too. So, as the executive director of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and somebody who works kind of in that space and really works not only to kind of increase representation in the Hill, but also, what specifically can you share with us about what CHC, what the caucus is doing in terms of the appointment process? Like what is happening right now with that?
So work for CHC on this stuff is being done unofficially. At some point, we'll have a list of endorsements. We'll have a list of resumes and names and work with different individuals to prepare them for this process. But in order to comply with ethics before the election, we have started an unofficial process where CHC members can identify leaders in their communities, in their states that they love, in their networks. Can flag them for CHC now because we don't want to wait too late to start this process, right? For us to start vet, and it's at all levels, right? I think a big focus is the top 100 positions because oftentimes those are the ones that need identified first, right? But we're already starting to identify descheduled positions, right? And then after the election is over, we'll turn on our official app and we'll start doing official endorsements and send out a letter with official names. And on the official side, I've been also hosting panels with appointees from the Obama administration and administrations to demystify, very similar to what the Melody presentation, but just individual stories, because it appears that there's no one path, right? Different people kind of follow different jobs based on their own experience and passion. So trying to demystify that process now in preparation for what's come hopefully in the coming weeks.
Thank you so much. And, Melody, and I know you already mentioned some of this in your earlier comments where you stressed to the folks that are on this call, you stressed to them kind of, yes, be prepared. Yes, do the research. Yes, be open but also kind of be true to yourself, right? Be true to kind of what you're interested in. It's not just about, oh, I'll do anything. Like think carefully, think strategically. When you decided to pursue a federal appointment, what were some of your kind of guideposts? Like, what was it that I think inspired you to do it? And then what for you was like the things that you kind of held closest as you went through that process?
Yeah, I think for me, it was a whole learning process. Coming from San Diego and being exposed to the world of politics here was, new. It was different. I didn't know too many people that had done this before. And so I remember being a congressional staffer and then starting to notice, a lot of people are starting to work on a presidential campaign or congressional campaign. So I figured, I should probably start doing some of that. And we organize on the Hill for those that are interested in working in Congress too. There's a Congressional Hispanic Staff Association, which is great to connect with. And we just kept thinking, how do we provide professional development opportunities for our staff? How do we grow the ranks? And I started to just realize that participating in political campaigns is an avenue by which people may land jobs working in Congress or in presidential administrations. But for me, it was also fun. Right. So a lot of times volunteering on campaigns was a matter of getting together with friends. We would plan at that point, we would do salsa nights for Obama or do road trips and go canvassing in Philadelphia. And it was a fun group where, for me, I think one of the things that strikes me about politics and campaigns is that, yes, it is about a candidate, but it's also about community building.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think that really drives a lot of my passion and heart for policy and political work is that it's really about trying to do as much good as you can for a broad segment of community, including people whose voices may not be part of the political process yet. And as I started to see some of my peers land different jobs in the administration, I started to realize, well, that's something I could probably do. Let me start learning about it. And I think I shared, at first, I think I was willing to serve in any number of different roles. And, as the years went by, I started to realize actually a lot of my heart is in worker empowerment and diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. I think what helped me is that I ended up working full-time for the Obama-Biden campaign second term. First term, I had done a short stint, but second term, I actually went out for many months running the Virginia Latino Vote program. And when I came back and started circulating that resume around, I started to get called in for higher level interviews with the administration. And so where before I was sometimes contacted for some more mid or junior positions, now I was starting to get calls for chief of staff level roles. So I also would encourage everybody to know that if the door doesn't open at first for you in the way that you want, keep working it. That's why I say keep building your skills, building your networks, because the door that opened for me a few years later was one that put me on a trajectory to eventually be a member of the senior executive service.
That's great. Yvette, my next question is for you, although Melanie, I'm going to come back to you because I want you to answer this question as well. Yvette, as you talked a lot about relationships, right? How so much of this comes down to relationships of just the people that you meet along the way, fostering those relationships for you as you went through the appointments process. Was it people that were mentors to you, people that encouraged you to apply for specific things, like folks that kind of were those validators that we heard about from Melody? Can you talk to us a little bit about who were those people that were kind of in your corner?
So I think actually it was a variety of different people, right? So I would say that it was my current employer at the time. He was a, senator from Alaska. So he knew me, knew my, my family. The nice thing about Alaska, it's a big state, but small population. So, I also, so I had, also, a college professor also vouched for me as I was volunteering the campaign. Those people that saw me volunteering were people who vouched for me and that were important in that process. I think that people that that I was friends with that were much more politically connected than me knew what kind of person I was from a personal level, also vouched for me because they were able to connect me with their political points of contact that were important. I think in this process, it's important to understand that there are many people that need to vouch for you, and then many people will help you get into the fold, so to speak. But the two people that matter, the two offices, I should say, that matter most, well, actually 3 offices. One, the PPO, the Presidential Personnel Office, they're based in the White House. They sign off on all, and again, each administration is different. This is the way it was run under the Bush administration. I'm sure, Melody, you can talk about the way it was run under the Obama administration. I'm sure it'll be different under the Biden, and I'm sure it's different now with the Trump administration. And the other office is whichever department you want to work in, there is always a White House liaison office. It literally is called White House Liaison. And that office kind of serves as the PPO in that specific, or HR department in that specific department. And they're the ones who will filter who goes on to the next level. And then obviously the hiring manager or hiring office, because they're the ones ultimately you're going to work for.
Yeah.
So it's important for you to know who those 3 departments are. And you can understand who is in that process or who is actually in those positions, and then try to understand, do you know them? And if you don't, do you know people who do?
Right.
And you need people to vouch for you that know those people who can vouch for you.
Yeah. So actually, you just reminded me of something. And I actually, Melody, before I come back to you, I actually want to go to Alma next, because this exactly what Yvette just talked about in terms of, well, how do you have people vouching for you? Like, what are I think sometimes people don't always know what is the right way to have people vouch for you. What's the right way to kind of sequence the people that are reaching out on your behalf. And I know, Alma, you've got a couple slides, I think, that you wanted to share with folks, and we can do that now, about kind of the CHC's process for the resume bank, and what are kind of some tips that I think will help get you to that next step of like, I've done the preliminary work. Now I have the people that I'm going to ask to vouch for me, but you want them to be vouching for you with, like, I think a strong kind of ability to say, yeah, like, this person's great. Their resume is tip top. There was no spelling mistakes, like, think whatever it is. But like, Alma, give us just real quick 1 or 2 of those, or give us, a little bit of that.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I'm really, and I know Stephanie's going to share all this afterwards for you all to look at, but basically we launch a resume bank every time there's an election, because oftentimes there's freshman offices that are coming, or staff leaving offices to work somewhere else. Maybe there'll be an opportunity to work for the administration. So there might be a mass exodus, and we want to be ready with level candidates, right? And we want to help people prepare at all levels. We want entry level and senior staff. So with the C Resume Bank, there's a questionnaire that you fill out and you upload your resume. And we are trying to set up, our goal is to set up informational interviews with every person that submits a resume. You have a chance to talk with a Hill staffer about what you think, what kind of job you're seeking, right? If you're end level, they can explain the different roles, what your resume should look like, how you interview on the Hill, right? It's a little bit different than the industry, if you will. So that's the purpose of the resume bank. And once we vet you, we have people do informational interviews with you. We start sharing your resumes with fresh offices, with leadership offices, anyone who's telling me I need to hire different people. And so really quickly, for those that may not be as familiar with the Hill, I just wanted to point out a couple of the roles that exist on the Hill. So you have communication jobs, right? You can be a press secretary, you can be a digital director, you have legislative job, you can be a legislative assistant, you can work in a committee on bills. And then there's also scheduling and administrative roles. So if you are organized and you know how an office, we also need you, right? So those are the kinds of jobs that we have on the Hill. And we can go to the next slide. And I know I always get questions, well, where can I see what jobs are available, right? How does it work? So we'll send you this website, but this place is to go to the Majority Leader /job page. And I've selected, you go to resources, you go to the job board, and you scan and see the different jobs that are posted. Not all the jobs are necessarily in DC. Some people have positions in their district office, right? So let's say you want to work for a California member, there might be opportunities for work in their district office, Orange County, for example. So that it's also for you to kind of look at the different positions in the different locations. We can go to this one. And then we'll send this to you. I know it's kind of small, but similar to what Melody said about resumes being one page, same thing. I know in some industries or some individuals that have a big thing listing all papers they've published, which is great. But for the Hill, you want to be very concise. And the Senate Democratic Diversity Initiative, which Lorenzo Olvet leads, has put together this nifty like one pager as to how to make sure your resume is ready for the Hill. So we'll share all of this with you. Next one. And then similar to having multiple validators, right? Great if you submit your resume to the CHC, you go through our process, we're pushing your name out, we're pushing resume out, but you also want to submit your resume everywhere you can, basically. So I have flagged all these other resume banks and we'll send you these links as well. I also have more information about how the Hill works. So I just wanted to give a quick overview because I believe many of you might be interested in appointee jobs, but also might want to work on the Hill, right? And so want to make sure you have the tools and know how to get that process started as well.
Again, more incredible information. That's incredible. Thank you. And the reason why this is so important, and it goes to what Yvette said earlier, was that there's going to be so much churn, right? Whether it's people leaving the administration, whether it's current Hill staffers going into a new administration. So then the Hill folks are leaving their jobs, going into maybe appointed positions. And so we need folks to fill the Hill jobs in. We need folks to fill the appointment, positions in. Like all of that churn is happening, and you want to be ready, and if you don't have those relationships, if you haven't been a part of kind of anything in DC, this is how you do it, right? You kind of get in there.
Yeah, and I actually want to stress that now that I have left government service per se, and I'm on the private sector side, when people look at my resume, really what has helped me most in my career, while they're very interested in learning about my White House experience and the stories and what have you, it's really the legislative experience that actually has gotten me most of my jobs post the White House. So that legislative experience, I think, is even probably more important as it relates to, post government jobs, if you're looking and thinking about that long term.
Yeah, no, it opens a lot of doors for sure. Speaking of opening doors, I want to go back to Melody, because when we talked about this idea of not only, and Ileana Ross-Layton mentioned this in the video that we saw earlier about, not just kind of who are the folks that opened some doors for you or encouraged you to seek out the appointments process and kind of vouched for you or validated you. But who also, it's just as important to be that person for somebody else, right? If somebody who is hopefully that for you, and then you pass it on to somewhere else. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think with all of these jobs, I always want to emphasize that everybody's path is different, right? Everybody's path is unique. And also, if you think about it like a recipe, you also want to cook your own recipe. You don't necessarily want to recreate somebody else's because it might not work for you. And so for me, I think one of the things that I've really cherished over the years is being able to cultivate, friendships and mentorships, some of them more informal, and just this network of people who I can reach out to and, have conversations with, so I can learn more about their experiences, the process. And I do want to emphasize too, while I shared some of the technical process, the people part is also a very important aspect of pursuing appointments, because oftentimes the work is hard, it's fast paced, it's high stakes. And so if you think about it, the people that you want to be in the trenches with in that sort of environment are people who will have your back, people who are willing to roll up their sleeves. So that's also why I emphasize, think about why you're uniquely qualified, because anybody can do the technical work, but not everybody will bring the spirit and the style and the approach, right, that you might. And I think for me, there were people that were more junior than me that were inside of the administration that helped share tips. There were people that I worked alongside with on the campaign who eventually became appointees, and they would help maybe move my resume or put in a good word for me. There were also more senior mentors who I could chat with. And, I can think of one who actually really went through my resume and helped to transform it. just by the nature of how I described the titles in my resume. She helped bump me up from somebody that was more of a junior looking sort of resume to somebody that was more of a mid to senior level person. And so I'm very grateful for, you know, that range of people that have helped me, because you need the people that will be your cheerleaders, your supporters, and give you the motivation. You need the people who will tear up your resume and tell you what you need to tweak. And sometimes that act of updating your resume is also about really telling your story to make it shine and helping you really kind of unlock and unpeel that story. And then when you're actually going through the process, you know, you need to have people too that you can talk to that might tell you more than what's in the job description.
Yeah.
What's the office culture like? What are the leaders like? What environment are you going to be stepping into, so that you don't get blindsided once you step into the role? So I would encourage everybody,
getting the
you know,
chisme.
yeah, you know, so I think for everybody, you know, think about not just the technical work, but who in my circles can I go to just tell me the real story?
No, thank you. That's super important. And I want to go back to something that, you know, we've touched on a couple of times, and um and Senator Cortez Masto referenced this in her comments in the video, is this kind of the idea of kind of, oh, am I ready? Am I qualified enough? And I think as people have learned through what we've seen so far, is that there's a lot of different levels of appointments, right? There's a lot of different positions on the Hill, whether it's a staff assistant or whether it's a comms director or a chief of staff, whatever it is. You know, what advice would you give to women? And this is a question for both of you, for Yvette and for Melody, is, you know, what advice would you say to somebody who says, oh, well, I don't know if like I feel ready, or I don't know if I'm prepared, or like, what would you say to those folks who are saying that to themselves? Like, oh, like, you know, I haven't checked all the boxes.
Listen, I am 45 years old, and I am an executive at a very large entertainment company. And as a woman, as a person who came from a conservative family, who came from a small town, there is not, I often feel, you know, am I good enough? Am I doing a good enough job, et cetera? This is something that I have learned over the years, that this is not unique to me. I thought I was the only one. I read Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In. I read Oprah Winfrey's articles. I read an article from Diane von Furstenberg, she's a very famous fashion designer. And these are three women that have all through their lives have literally asked, like, I'm a fraud. They're going to figure me out. I shouldn't be here, right? And this is Sheryl Sandberg, who's the current CEO of Facebook, is saying, like, there are times where she shows up at a meeting and she's like, do I belong here, right? This is something that it's an evolving process. It's not unique to somebody. And I think as long as we all know that is a normal feeling, but that you are good enough and you are capable. And you know, there's a book that I really want to recommend. It's called Confidence Code. It was co-written by Katty Kay. She's the head of BBC America. It's a really great book because it talks about that men need to only feel 40% confident to apply for a job, accept the job, volunteer for a task. Women need to feel 100%. So this is a book that's written and targeted towards women, that we need to feel 100% confident to apply for a job, yet 40% of men need to. So it just shows that at the end of the day, it's about just start, do it. You'll learn, you're capable. I think life in general is about, you know, decision making and judgment and you know, again, following up and being organized and, you know, being passionate about things. These are things that, again, that if you have all these skill sets, you'll learn, you'll do it. And if you don't know something, then stay at work longer, read more about the issue longer, you know, to catch up to speed with somebody who may have more expertise than you. But one thing that I've learned in life is that you are good enough and you can learn, and you just need to start.
Yeah.
So when you have those voices in your head, say, no, I am good enough. I can apply for that job, and I am going to kill it in that interview, and I am going to do the best that I can in that job.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think you raise a great point about the psychological part of this, right? The emotional part of this, like that part of you that also, it's not just about investing in having a great looking resume, doing the work of like meeting with people and doing the research. There's a psychological kind of emotional component to this as well, of being like, yeah, like I deserve to be here. I know what I'm about. I know who I am. I know what I'm capable of. I may not know the answer to this question, but I know how to get the answer, right? And so it's like, I think that's a big part of this too. And I want to pivot off of that quickly, Melody, to you. And if I can put this, because we've got a question from somebody in the chat about, as we think about barriers, we think about access and how to offset, some of those barriers that people encounter in career advancement. What do you think in terms of, do you think higher education, whether it's having, obviously having a college degree, having a master's degree, or higher a professional degree, do you think those things in the appointments process, or even you can speak to the Hill experience too, do you think that higher education achievement that people may have of multiple degrees or what have you, you think that offsets some of the barriers to career advancement?
Yeah, I think I saw that question pop up, and I think it's an interesting one, and I can't emphasize enough that everybody has a unique story, right? So please don't think I have to get a master's before I can apply. I have to get a JD before I apply, because while there are people that get appointments that have some of those, educational qualifications, there might be also others that don't. And there are also others who I know that right now are actually finishing up their master's or JD program. They decided to do it after serving in the administration. So again, that's why I always come back to this journey is yours, right? So I think what you can, and I think it comes back to where do you want to serve? What do you want to do? And how does that play a role in the whole timeline of your life, of your personal and professional trajectory, right? And so you don't want to be applying for things that are kind of really just random and not necessarily in sync with your longer term sort of career interests, right? But rather think about where do I have something to offer? And when I finish serving that term, how might that also help position me for my next thing, whether it's applying for grad school or law school or another certain sort of position and career. I think that, the mistake that can happen or the danger is to try to go after a certain recipe, a certain checklist that you have to go after. And you might be checking off those items on that box in that hunt to try to land the perfect position, but it may not get you the job. And that checklist might not really truly benefit you, right? So really be true to yourself. What do you want to do? What's your passion? What energizes you? And I think too, like what comes to mind with that question that you just mentioned about, what would you say to people that are in that place of maybe not applying or thinking they have to check a few more boxes before they do? I finished this executive coaching program and love asking just different questions. And I think one thing that would be important to ask is, what's holding me back? What's behind this thought? What am I afraid of? Is there really a fear there, right? Because chances are, if you're holding yourself back from this one opportunity, you might be playing that same scenario out in other aspects of your life. So now is the time to squash that and figure out, okay, what am I really afraid of? What do I need to do so that I don't have that fear? Or it doesn't feel like a big giant monster behind me, but that it's something more manageable. And then I guarantee you, if you're able to conquer that and work on that now, it's going to help for any other scenario that comes at you down the road. You don't want to be in that cycle of always second guessing yourself and questioning yourself.
No, that's great advice. And I think that's so important for people to keep in mind. So I know we've talked a lot about kind of the different ways of kind of getting at this and looking at the process, trying to get, penetrate it, going through it. One thing we haven't talked about is, well, Melody mentioned a little bit, but Yvette, I'd love to hear more from you on this too, is about timeline, right? Because it's not necessarily a linear process all the time of the appointment that you're pursuing and then what you're actually getting, or maybe you're interviewing, but then it's like you're waiting, and then it's kind of like hurry up and get these documents in, but then wait some more. And so talk to us, Yvette, what did your timeline look like? I mean, what did your from the time you kind of said, yes, I'm gonna look for something in the administration until you actually got placed? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Yeah, so I was volunteering with the Bush campaign, and then I applied for a position at DHS, as I mentioned. It took probably from the time I decided and actually applied and started reaching out about 6 months to actually get hired and start. I know that when I moved from DHS to the White House, that probably was another, that probably took 3 to 4 months. And you would think that, I mean, it would be easier because you're working, within the same administration, but just like anything, there isn't, especially in the White House, I would say. I think other departments, as Melody mentioned, the Plum Book is a great resource. I find the White House, and it might be a little bit different now. It might be, it's been a while since I've actually been in the White House and kind of their process, but a lot of the White House positions are not publicly posted, or you don't really know how they're hired, or you really only hear by word of mouth. And so it was through, again, the same network of people that helped me at DHS had told me about a position that was available in the White House. And that's when, I sent my resume to people that knew the hiring manager. And then I literally built kind of a board of advisors, per se, that were lobbying on my behalf. And when I say board of advisors, it's friends and people who knew me, who could vouch for me, people at DHS, the White House, liaison office, anyone that I could reach out to say, hey, I'm interested in this position. This is who I am. Helped me be able to advocate for myself for that position, and get me at least in the door. And then from there, obviously, I, went through the interview process and went through numerous, interviews in person. And then from there, it was, I think people need to know that they'll check your voting record. I mean, by law, they don't know how you voted, but when you vote, it is recorded. And so they check those things. In my case, I needed to get a background clearance for my job at the DHS. So that was going back, I think, 10 years of rental history to education history to employment history. So when I say that people vouch for me, I'm not only talking about people who actually got me the position, but people who I would not have been able to get my position unless I was able to get that background clearance. And that background clearance included college professors and people who knew me back home in Alaska. So that's what I mean about kind of building a board of directors for yourself, kind of a coalition of people that you can reach out to that are your mentors, but also too that will vouch for who you are from every perspective of your life, from young to education to employment to even personal.
That's great. And I have a couple questions here in the chat that I want to put to whichever one of you wants to answer it. One person asked if you have recommendations for folks who are currently in career service, but that are seeking political appointee roles. So like jumping from one to the other, or kind of, what can you share about that process that might be helpful?
Grisella, can you repeat the question?
Sure. So somebody who's already currently serving at an agency, right, but in a career service role, somebody who's not an appointee. So one of these Melody, you're gonna have to refresh me on the terminology, the non-confirmed, maybe it's like an SES position, but you wanted
there's career and there's political. And then in each of those positions, you have different ranking orders.
Okay.
But
So,
either career or political, and career is non-political.
Right. So from the career side, do we often see folks from career roles going into political appointee roles? And if that does happen, kind of, is there anything about that transition that's different, right? I'm based on kind of, my guess would be that if you're in a career role, but you want to be a political appointee, which is a high, typically higher level, my guess would be that you've also, you've got to have those kind of political connections. You've got to be active within like maybe the party. You've got to be active within the campaigns that are behind them. Talk to us a little bit about the differences in those things and kind of maybe what someone might need to do to supplement a career role to get into a political appointee role. And I think that'll be our last question too, because I think we need to wrap soon.
Yeah, and I think that one's tricky. So I would say if you are a career staff, maybe chat with your Office of Ethics. Each department has an ethics officer and team and lawyers that can help. Oftentimes I had a chance to work at 2 different federal agencies and they were really fantastic resources. So number one, that Office of Ethics might already actually have some guidance or some information. You can check in with them oftentimes one-on-one. I was trying to think if I had any examples that came to mind of people I knew who had been career staff. They didn't come to mind, but that's not necessarily to say that hasn't happened. I would say that oftentimes there is a practice called burrowing that is discouraged, which is the reverse, right? Somebody that's a presidential or political appointee trying to then apply to burrow and stay in the federal career. They're scrutinized, and when they go through that sort of application process, there are additional reviews and checks in that process. But I don't have info on the flip side.
That's helpful. Well, I want to be mindful of the time because I know we're going to get some closing remarks from Stephanie, but any parting words that both of you want to share with everybody who's joined us today?
Melody,
I just say I'd encourage you all to apply. Please don't overthink it. Be true to yourself, be true to your journey. And identify those opportunities that energize you, that would energize you personally, professionally. And I would encourage you to, in addition to considering presidential appointments, really look at your state and local positions as well. I'll share it in the chat, the link for our Virginia board and commission site. They really spell out the process very easily. We need more Latinos and Latinas to apply for boards and commissions in Virginia. If you're interested in Virginia appointments as well, shoot me a note, find me on LinkedIn. And I would say that as you're researching your positions, know that there might also be other positions that could suit you that you might not even know about, right? So the most important thing is making your interests known and sharing your story of your interests so that others can be those validators and keep eyes open for opportunities for you.
And again, I just want to echo, Melody's comments. I think ultimately what I've learned in my career, both in government and non-government, is being open to new opportunities, moving cities, staying in the same city, state, not being afraid. The worst they can say is no. And learning from that, I think going for it, understanding why you want to be in public service, and ensuring that you're serving in the right role. So looking to ensure what your passion is it education, is it energy, is it commerce, is it State Department, is it foreign affairs, applying. I
think, did we freeze? We might have frozen a little bit there on the last words, but I cannot stress enough what Yvette just said about why are you really passionate about public service? And I think that's a thing. I think that's probably what has driven all of us who've been in that position, whether it was working on the Hill, whether it was working, in an agency, that drive for public service. Hey, Yvette, you're back. And you're on mute, though. You're on mute.
Okay, guys, sorry about that. This happens, right? So my computer died, unfortunately. Just want to say again, I think at the end of the day, just, going to what Melody was saying, understand your passion, who you are, how you want to serve, apply. All those things are available online. I think right now, the best thing you can do is look at your network and see who those champions can be for you. Again, I'm available on LinkedIn. Please reach out to me. I'd be happy to have one-on-one talks with you and anything I can do to help you. I'm based in Las Vegas. If you're ever out here, let me know. Love to meet with you for coffee. But at the end of the day, whether you're serving in government or not, it's all about how you're making this world a better place, how you're using your talents and your gifts, and how you are providing those gifts to the world and to our country. And that really is done through relationships. So I can't stress enough the importance of building relationships and sincere and genuine relationships.
Thank you so much to both of you, Melody, Yvette, and I know Alma had to drop off early, so we thank her too. You guys have been incredible. Thank you for everything you're doing out there, for sharing your experiences with everyone here today. Folks, don't take for granted that they're offering feedback. So if you want to give feedback. It's important to do all of these things if we can. So Stephanie, I'm going to turn it over back to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Melody and Yvette for all the insight you provided. Grisella, thank you so much for moderating the conversation and keeping it flowing, and to Alma as well, who had to hop off early. I do want to share with you, we will be sharing the slideshow, but I wanted to go ahead and just share with you that the NHLA is also working on a resume bank, and Olivia has dropped into the chat. If you're interested in learning more about the NHLA resume, please make sure you fill out that form that's being dropped into the chat so that we can go ahead and contact you once that's up and ready. Also, please make sure that you follow us on Latinas Represent social media, as well as the NHLA social media. As I mentioned at the beginning of this event, we have dropped our 2020 public policy agenda, and you can find that on our NHLA website. And then lastly, I want to just give a big shout out and a special thank you to the NHLA Latina Task Force, which is comprised of all of these amazing groups. They have been so instrumental in helping the Latinas Represent initiative, as well as providing so much support. I just want to thank each and every one of them, with a special shout out to Casa de Esperanza for loaning us so many staff and equipment and everything that we needed to make this program possible. And then another thank you to our funders as well, Reflect Us and the Ascend Fund, which work to increase political participation of women, especially getting more women into elected office. So with that, I do want to close, make sure that we do so on time, and just thank each and every single one of you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us via social media. You can also reach out to us through our contact form on the Latinas Represent website. This has been recorded, and we will share that with you as well. So we'll be sharing the PowerPoint and the recording with everyone who registered. Thank you once again for making the time to join us. And thank you to our wonderful panelists for giving their time. We are so appreciative of every single one of you. And I hope you have all been inspired to apply for some presidential appointments, or even for Capitol Hill staff positions. So thank you.